Hello everybody, Maven here, and surprisingly, the Lucky Raspberry is back on the menu. And I could be wrong, but I don't think any YouTuber has covered this build in like the past year. And in that time, it has received a plethora of new toys to play with, and it's a ton of fun, and it's better than it ever has been before. It's better than it ever hoped of being. Now, yes, it's no Arc Titan, it's no Geomag, so don't expect it to annihilate all levels of content for you. But for what it is, it puts in the work, and it does consistent damage, it's amazing at ad clear, and most importantly, it's fun. So let's break it down. Hope you enjoy. Shout out to our sponsor, Advanced GG, the #1 gaming supplement in the world. Use code MAVEN at checkout for 10% off. Link down below. Thank you. So let's start by reading the Lucky Raspberry. It improves the chaining capabilities of your arc bolts and they stun overload champions. Cool. But the part that we really care about is that damaging jolted targets and collecting ionic traces grant you a bunch of grenade energy, which are the two things that we're doing constantly with this build. And like I just said in the intro, over the past year we got plenty of new toys that synergize with this build, but the most significant one is probably the perk Jolting Feedback. Having this perk pretty much guarantees that you'll apply jolt to something, whereas before we had to rely on kills for volt shot, and the reliability of that heavily dwindles as the content becomes more difficult. So having this guaranteed jolt is absolutely incredible for the Lucky Raspberry. So allow me to demonstrate how this works. So I'm gonna lose my nade charge real quick and then use Jolting Feedback to jolt Carl and watch my nade energy. Every time jolt procs, it gives us a bump of grenade energy, and having this capability anytime on command just for simply having a Jolting Feedback weapon is incredible utility to have, especially in tougher content and also for bosses, you know, where you can't really proc volt shot. And it's this feature on the Lucky Raspberry that makes it really nice to have a damage over time weapon such as the Wither Horde, Anarchy, or an area denial grenade launcher. So as you can see here, whenever there's a chunky enemy, you can just jolt them and stick them with the Wither Horde, and suddenly the damage over time from my Wither Horde is constantly proccing those jolt triggers for me, just feeding me a bunch of free nade energy, and then I can just repeat the process. So that is generally the main concept of how this build works. So with that said, there's 3 potential loadouts that you can run to support this concept. There's the Lost Signal Warlord Spear with the Thunder Lord, which will give us some pretty solid DPS. Then there's the Buzzard Warlord Spear and Anarchy if you need to use anti-barrier sidearm for any reason. But the loadout that I'm personally using is the Wither Horde, Warlord Spear, and the Watchful Eye. The role I got on my Watchful Eye is Overflow with Jolting Feedback, and my Warlord Spear is Rewind rounds with Jolting Feedback. And having 2 Jolting Feedback weapons here is quite nice for the consistency of this build. And the reason it's super nice to have a machine gun is because we can use the Heavy Ordnance Regeneration Artifact mod to give us a 25% damage resistance for 15 seconds when we hit a few shots with a machine gun. And it's nice to have every bit of survivability we can because Arc Hunter doesn't have many avenues of survival. Now, I know what some people might be thinking about my Warlord Spear. They're like, Maven, why are you running the Warlord Spear when the Karanios is just better? And you're not wrong, the Karanios is technically better as it can get triple tap with Jolting Feedback, which just gives you free ammo out of thin air, plus the Classic Contender Origin trait actually does something. But the thing about the Warlord Spear is that rewind rounds is just far more consistent. You don't need to hit crits. Sometimes enemies are small and nimble and move around like those little flying bat dudes. Some are shielded and some don't even have crits. And when I have rewind rounds, I can guarantee I'll always have that massive mag size because all I have to do is land shots. And a majority of the time, your Karanios will just fumble because you'll miss all your crits on some situations. And ammo isn't really an issue when I can just spam special ammo finishers. That's why I prefer the Warlord Spear. And yes, there are other weapons that get Jolting Feedback, but Trace Rifles are obviously the best option right now because of the Beam Medic and Harsh Refraction artifact mods, so Rapid Trace Rifle Final Blows heal us and also get a massive 50% damage buff, so they're basically heavies. But now moving on to the next new thing that the Lucky Raspberry got as of recent times, in episode Heresy, the Tempest Strike aspect got a huge overhaul. First of all, it got a gigantic 57% damage buff, so now we're hitting like a truck, especially with Bolt Charge. And speaking of Bolt Charge, it has a new functionality where defeating a jolted target grants you Bolt Charge. And I don't know if you noticed in the gameplay, but we are jolting stuff non-stop with our Trace, Machine Gun, our nades with Spark of Shock, Tempest Strike, and we're dodging with our Gambler's Dodge so we can spam that Tempest Strike even more. Pair this with Spark of Frequency, where every time a source gives us Bolt Charge, we get an additional stack, and this is how we're able to get Bolt Charge so stupidly fast. But I will say you can get Bolt Charge even faster if you run the Lost Signal loadout, but I'm not doing that in the gameplay. But as it is, we're causing that Bolt Charge Lightning Strike on almost every ability kill we throw out. It's so frequent, and the Flashover Artifact mod is buffing our Lightning Strikes by 150%, making our abilities hit like a nuke. And all this jolting also ties in a Spark of Ions, where defeating a jolted target creates an Ionic Trace, great for ability spam. But you also remember that Lucky Raspberry has an ability that says Ionic Traces grant additional grenade energy, so the nade spam is just wild. And these Ionic Traces also proc Spark of Discharge, which says collecting an Ionic Trace grants a stack of Bolt Charge. And even our Weapon Final Blows can make traces, so even more spam there. And our Jolt also procs the enhanced version of the Dielectric Artifact mod to make it spawn an Orb of Power and heal us, which is a super nice bonus. So there's actually a decent amount of survival on this build between Dielectric, Beam Medic, the new Exhaust mechanic, Heavy Ordnance Regeneration, Amplified, and Recuperation. It's not the worst. Obviously, it's not nearly on par with that Invincible Hunter build I did last week, shameless plug, but it's not bad. So let's move on to our mod setup. The goal here is just to utilize special ammo finishers on a class item to make sure that we never run out of ammo for our double specials. So we gotta make orbs, which we're doing with Dielectric, Reaper, Heavy-Handed, and Arc Siphon. And we got charged up in stacks on stacks just to make the armor charge more efficient. Then as for the rest of our mods from the top down, we got Hands-On, Dynamo, Bolstering Detonation, Momentum Transfer, a Resist, Arc Reserves, Absolution, and Powerful Attraction. For our stats, I opted for double hundreds in Resilience and Discipline, and dumped the rest into Mobility. And here's a snippet of my artifact mod setup for those who are curious, and that about does it for the build. For the gameplay loop, you're basically just spamming Arc Bolts and Tempest Strikes and Gambler's Dodges back to back as much as you possibly can, and in the moments between, you're basically just using your Trace and your Heavy as a means to get your grenade back and repeat that process. And whenever you go for a Tempest Strike, it like launches you in the air. And when you're suspended in the air like that, that's like an ideal time for you to like shoot out a Witherhoard shot or a Lost Signal shot or whatever it is you're running. And that's pretty much it. Extremely fun Hunter build. I'm having a blast with it. It's probably the fastest way to spam Bolt Charge on Hunter. So it's just very satisfying shooting those lightning bolts all over the place. Groups of ads just get deleted. Facet of Dominance is a thing, so I might actually consider exploring this build on Prismatic and see what it can do. The survivability will probably be better, but you can't go wrong with the spamminess and the Bolt Charge you get on Arc. That's where this build's true power comes from, and that's honestly what the Lucky Raspberry has been missing all these years. It's always been pretty lackluster, but when we got the initial overhaul, it wasn't bad, but Bolt Charge is what it needed for it to finally be considered good, in my opinion. So if you're a Hunter player, I recommend giving it a try. Speaking of which, I'll leave the dim loadout link to the build down below in the description and also the pinned comment if you'd like to give it a try. And if you got any buddies who are Hunter mains, I'd appreciate if you consider sharing the video with them, because perhaps this is something they might want to try out. And I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, be sure to hit the like button. It helps out a ton. And if you are new here, please consider subscribing. Would love to have you here for more content on the way. And remember to check out our sponsor, Advanced GG. Use code MAVEN at checkout for 10% off your order. Link down below, and I will catch you in the next video. See you later.